Um, yeah, maybe we'll go ahead and jump in. I want to, first of all, just kind of rehash, and I want to keep reminding you guys, even, some of the goal of what um, this, Tuesday night stream event is. I am going to make these available afterward. Um, I'm still struggling with some of the tech things and learning all of that. So I don't think the first one has been uploaded onto our YouTube page, or it's not been listed yet. So I'll make sure that these videos get listed on our YouTube channel. So if you watch online at all, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where they go to. So all our sermons and everything is up there, and these will go up there as well. And I'm going to try to make them in like a different folder or something. I wish I could explain to you how YouTube works. I don't really know. I'll try to make it so that you can tell the difference between all of our sermon videos and these videos, so that you don't have to get lost trying to scroll between them. So hopefully that will work out. But ultimately, kind of the purpose of this, I wanted it to be live so that all of you guys who I maybe don't get to see all the time, that we get to interact a little bit. You guys get to ask questions. You can jump on here and we can actually engage in a bit of a conversation. I know it's not like the ideal way to have a conversation, but it's still interaction, and I hope that it's helpful for you guys to be able to jump on and actually ask questions and engage in the moment. I always think that's the best way. And ultimately, the end goal isn't just for us all to have a few digital ways that we chat sometimes. I mean, I really want this to be an equipping opportunity where we get to unpack a bit of what we're learning as a church, and we get to dive into it a little bit more and discuss, dive into the scriptures a little bit, really study some things, but also begin a conversation about how we're going to practice it. And ultimately, I want this to go, into your own communities and the way, the interaction that you have available. Because I think, I realize we're all limited in the interaction that we have. Our community has been stripped. That's the case for me. I don't have the same kind of community that I had before COVID. And I'm sure that's true for you guys as well. But I do think there is some community that we have. I mean, all of us have some people that we're interacting with. Maybe it's still not the way you wish it was, but we have some community that I'm sure is helping sustain us. We all need that. And whether it's our family or there's a few key friends that we rely on or spend time with consistently, and I want this conversation to be an opportunity for you to take it into those spaces, because we need to practice our faith with people. And this, first of all, this community, this eCampus is an attempt to have a space for you guys for us to share and grow together. But it's also an opportunity for you guys to take that into the more intimate relationships that you're relying on your day-to-day life. So if that's your immediate family, my question, and the question that will be ongoing in this group is, how are you practicing what we're learning in your family? Or if the people that you rely on is your friends, or it's a significant other, or it's, who is that community that you rely on? And how are you bringing these conversations into that? And, if you don't feel like you have any Christian community, I understand that. And that's part of the point of this community that we have. And I know it's online, but we want to help you build that. We want to be a part of it. And this is an opportunity for us to engage as well. If you're not in our Facebook group, I'd love for you to join that. If you're not, just let me know. You can message me on Facebook, you can text me. My email's on the church website. I'd love for you to be a part of that, because that's also a space where you can share, your prayer requests, that you can share questions that you have that maybe you thought of afterwards, or maybe you're trying to figure out how do I practice this and what are some questions that are on your mind. And maybe you can share ways that God is working. We'd love to encourage you and be a part of that. But that's a chance to have an ongoing conversation about what we're learning together. It's also, a way that I'm trying to make myself available for any questions or thoughts or things that you're trying to figure out. I just want to be available to you guys to be a part of that conversation as you're trying to learn. Even in this distanced time, how do you practice what we're going through as a church, what we're learning in your immediate life? And I want to be a part of that. So know that I'm available through that. We also have our Instagram account, our River E Campus. If you go on Instagram, just search River E Campus. I really doubt that there's another River E Campus Instagram account. If you have a hard time finding it, let me know. But I'll try to post, consistent updates about what's going on, and also just ongoing, questions, things to be thinking about. Things, as we go through sermon series together, as we go through content here on Tuesday nights together. I'm going to try to keep posting, things to think about, questions. Maybe it's things for opportunity for you to interact and ask me questions. You can always message me or comment on there. So that's just a real quick, easy way for us to stay engaged throughout the week. So I hope that you guys will engage these opportunities. But ultimately, this community is meant to strengthen the immediate relationships around you and how you're going to practice, growing as a disciple in the relationships that are most immediate to you. So my question to you, is what is that community that you do have, and how are you going to continue this conversation into that to continue to grow and practice what we're learning? Because ultimately, our faith is something that's practiced. It's not just some ideas that we talk about. So I hope that can be this can be an opportunity for growth in those areas. So yeah, but tonight we're going to be talking a bit about wisdom, and just so I can make sure. Maybe this is crazy, but is everything still working? Do y'all still see me? Because I'm just a little bit anxious since I still don't know how I can't tell what's really happening on your end. So if somebody could jump in the comments and let me know that it's still running, that would be awesome. We can still see. All right, that's what I wanted to hear. All right, so on Sunday, we've been in this series called Better, and we've been talking about, basically it's kind of, we've been going through wisdom and how, our lives are better when we follow the principles of God's kingdom. And last week, I want to do a bit of recap because, last week I talked a little bit about wisdom literature in the Bible. And first of all, I mentioned that there are many genres in the Bible, that the Bible is not just, one book that you apply all the same principles to when we read, but within the Bible are many different kinds of writings. And each book, many of the books are different types of literature, almost the way, when you go to like a bookstore or a library or a Barnes and Noble, that is you walk into a bookstore and you walk through the aisles without even thinking, because you understand the genres of our day. You automatically make assumptions about how to read each book as you approach different aisles in the library or the bookstore. So if you walk into the fantasy aisle, you'll see all kinds of book covers that have, space and werewolves and all kinds of crazy things. And if you were to open one of those books, there's a whole set of assumptions that automatically occur in your brain that help you understand what's happening in the book. If you go into the historical section, there's a different set of assumptions that help you understand that book. So if you open up a book that's about Abraham Lincoln, and it starts talking about Abraham Lincoln slaying vampires, you're going to be absolutely perplexed if that book is in the historical section, because that's not history. There's suddenly you've entered this fantasy world. Now, if you saw that book in the fantasy section, you wouldn't be confused. You might think it was a weird story, but it would make sense. And those assumptions about the genre help you to understand what's happening in the book. And the same is true with the Bible. Sometimes we don't realize how important that is, and we'll begin to read every book in the Bible as if they require the same assumptions, but they don't. There actually are different styles of literature and different genres of literature. And so it's helpful to understand these in order to be able to have the right assumptions in your mind when you begin to read them. And so one of the genres of literature in the Bible is called is what we call wisdom literature. And the books that would fit into this is like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon would be in that as well. Job would fit in that category. And last week, Mark read from some Ecclesiastes and some Proverbs, and we talked about some of that stuff. But a few things, just to recap, I want to reinforce some of these things about wisdom literature, so that we can understand, when we talk about, today we're going to talk a bit about Proverbs. And there's a few like underlying principles of wisdom literature. This genre, wisdom literature, is sort of like the common sense section of the Bible. It's it's a collection of things that are lived wisdom. And in a lot of ways, it's sort of like how to live wisely in God's world. It's how to go with the grain of how God has created the world. It's really unpacking the relationship between wisdom and righteousness. But it's not always this kind of like beautiful theology. It's really, I heard someone say this way, wisdom literature is sort of about righteousness with its sleeves rolled up. It's almost like we're getting into the nitty gritty of life. We're into the day-to-day practical stuff. There's a lot of, literature in the Bible about, faith and hope and love and sort of these, beautiful discussions about theological truths and who God is. And wisdom literature is like, the day-to-day nitty-gritty, like, what's it like to be righteous tomorrow and just, my regular life. It's, it's less emphasis on sort of the pretty things and more emphasis on practical wisdom that is pleasing to God. And there's a few underlying assumptions that help with this. One of the assumptions in wisdom literature is that, the fear of God is essential. This is sort of the core of where wisdom comes from. In a lot of ways, wisdom is understood to be true. It's God's truth wherever it can be found. But at its core, it only really works when it's employed with the fear of God. So one of the other assumptions is sort of that all truth is God's truth. So wisdom literature functions with this understanding that if it's true, then it belongs to God. If it's really true, then it's God's truth. And so wisdom can be found in all sorts of places. It can be found in bakeries, and it can be found on street corners, and it can be found in parental guidance. It can be found in a simple person. It can be found in a high esteemed person. Wisdom is wherever God's truth is present. It's like God has made the world, and almost the imagery in Proverbs is that wisdom is woven into the fabric of God's world, and it can be found in all these different places. And so there's collections of wisdom that come from all these different scenarios and places in life. And if it's true of God. But the other principle that goes with that within wisdom literature is that it only really works. Wisdom only really applies if it's done with the fear of God. So one of the keys, the essential key to living wisely is obviously gathering wisdom, but then it's also submitting humbly to God in that wisdom, because that's like the underlying secret sauce. That's the key that makes wisdom work, is that you have to live in reverence to God. And this term fear of God, you probably see it in the Proverbs, you probably seen it in Psalms, and you probably see it in Ecclesiastes. And but it doesn't mean to be scared of God. It's sort of this, the way I've heard it said is reverence and relationship. So you have a relationship with God, and so you trust him, but you also, there's a deep reverence for his power, for his knowledge, for how much greater than us he is, for his majesty, his omnipotence, his all-knowing. There's this deep reverence for God that is seated in the midst of this rich relationship. And that's really what the fear of God is about. And if you have fear of God, then all these principles of wisdom begin to make sense. They begin to work. So I hope that helps. That's kind of the framework. The last underlying assumption I would say in wisdom literature, as we're kind of diving into these that help us understand the genre of what we're reading, is wisdom literature sort of operates like these are the rules when things go right. So it's almost like it's very almost formulaic. Like if you do this and you do this, you will get this. So you'll see a lot of proverbs are do this, and this will go well, or don't do this and don't do this. It's sort of A plus B equals C. Now, what we know about reality is that sometimes those things don't work, and because there's interference, there's problems, there's messiness to life, and wisdom operates on the premise that this is the way to follow God. So you'll see a lot of things in Proverbs that will be like how to be prosperous. And we all know that sometimes that still doesn't happen. Sometimes you follow God and you follow his principles, and you may not be rich, or you may not have success in certain areas, or you may not, and that's a reality in life. But wisdom literature isn't trying to get into all of the exceptions and all of it's really about how to live wisely. And these are the principles. So there's exceptions, but these are the principles of how to live according to God's ways. I hope that makes sense. So all truth is God's truth. The key to employing wisdom is the fear of God. And these principles are the principles of are the best way to live according to God's ways and to experience what God desires for us to experience. If you live these ways, theoretically, here's what should happen. So those are kind of some of the underlying assumptions as we jump into wisdom literature. I hope this is making sense. Again, if you have questions, please just comment. If you have any thoughts or interjections, don't be afraid to share them. So these are some of the thoughts. And I want to jump into, one of the things that Mark talked about on Sunday. He really jumped into Proverbs, and the theme that he was unpacking comes from Proverbs 16:16. And the principle, he said, was that wisdom is better than gold. And what we see in Proverbs 16:16, it says, how much better to get wisdom than gold and good judgment than silver. So, how much better to get wisdom than gold and good judgment than silver. And this is, if you look through the book of Proverbs, you'll see that there's a few different sections, and the bulk of Proverbs is sort of these individual like snippets. And they're almost like individual, just like bits of wisdom. They're not always necessarily connected, just because verse 4 says something and verse 5 has a different proverb. Those proverbs may not be connected at all. Now, there may be times, I don't have any examples off the top of my head. There may be times when certain proverbs are put next to each other intentionally, but that's not necessarily the case. So it doesn't read like a cool story. Proverbs is one of those things that it's not like all in kind of this chronological order and you just read through it like a book. They're really like a collection of snippets of wisdom. So one of these snippets is in 16:16, where it says, how much better to get wisdom than gold and good judgment than silver. But this is actually a major theme throughout the whole book, actually. I do want to just point out something really quick, because I think this is a helpful tool. It's actually, you'll notice even in that verse 16, where it says, how much better to get wisdom than gold and good judgment than silver. This is a common tool in Hebrew literature. It's called parallelism. And it basically means that there are two statements, and the second statement is basically a reiteration of the first statement in a slightly different wording. So if you notice, it says, how much better to get wisdom than gold and good judgment than silver. It's almost like the first half and the second half they're saying the same thing in different words. Wisdom than gold, good judgment than silver. So there's probably not any major significance to, when it's wisdom and good judgment they're talking about the same thing. Gold, silver, they're talking about the same thing. Sometimes parallelism is used for a specific goal. So sometimes it will be like a movement. So it might be, part 1 will be more general and part 2 will be more specific. So, if I was making it up an example, it might be how much better to get, maybe not wisdom. It might be how much better to get wisdom than, jewels, and how much better to get prudence than gold. So like gold is more specific than jewels and prudence is more specific than wisdom. That's not really a great example, but what I'm saying is sometimes the parallelism is intentional and there's a movement from general to specific. Maybe it's a chronological thing. It could move from, there's different ways that it can move. So that's something to note, to pay attention to. But sometimes it is just a reiteration of the same concept twice. And that is a staple of Hebrew writing style. It's sort of like the way we use similes, or, we have little tools that we use in writing in English that are common. This is a common writing tool in ancient Hebrew, and it's called parallelism. So that's just something to keep your eye out for. I think it's a helpful little tidbit as you're reading through Proverbs. So this concept of wisdom being precious, more precious than gold, more valuable than jewels, is a major theme. If you guys would, if you have a Bible with you, I'd love for you to open up actually to Proverbs chapter 2. And I want to walk through this a little bit for a minute. So if you open up to Proverbs chapter 2, I'll give you a quick second. Sip my coffee here. Proverbs chapter 2. If you're not sure where Proverbs is, it's pretty much in the middle of the Bible. You can kind of flip. I opened to Daniel, so not quite, but it's a little bit before the middle. Let's see. See if I can point you in the right direction. It's right after Psalms. So, I mean, it's pretty close to the middle. It's, somewhere in there. But if you want to open to Proverbs chapter 2, the opening of Proverbs is really interesting because before we get to all those individual Proverbs and little snippets, there's kind of some opening bits of Proverbs that are a little bit more dialogue or prose, you might say. Chapter 1 is like that. In fact, chapter 1 is kind of an opening to the book. It describes the purpose. It says, these are the Proverbs of Solomon. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise, to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives, to do what is right, just, and fair. So begins to describe the purpose of this book. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. And then it kind of jumps into this exhortation. It's almost like a father giving wisdom or giving advice to his son in verse 8. Actually, verse 7, before we get to verse 8 in the book of Proverbs, in chapter 1, verse 7 is kind of this crucial verse. It's setting up the whole purpose of the book. And in verse 7, it says, "Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline." So here's kind of like this key verse in helping us understand the whole function of the book. So it's talking about how this book is about teaching people wisdom and discipline. And then verse 7, "The fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline." So that's what I was saying earlier about kind of this book is about, how to live according to God's ways, how to live in grain with the way God's made the world. But the key, the secret sauce, is that real wisdom begins to work when its foundation is the fear of the Lord. So you can follow these principles of wisdom and they may still work. A plus B will probably still equal C, but the key to true wisdom, what will really give you the benefits of living wisely, is the fear of the Lord. And so that's sort of the underlying principle. And then it goes into this kind of exhortation in verse 8. We see this imagery of like a father speaking to his child. He says, "My child, listen when your father corrects you. Don't neglect your mother's instruction. What you learn from them will crown you with grace, will be a chain of honor around your neck." And he begins to sort of give this advice. And it's sort of setting up the book, describing, how we should learn and seek out wisdom. And then we get to chapter 2. This is where it really leans into this idea that wisdom is something precious to be sought out. It says in chapter 2, verse 1, "My child, listen to what I say." I'm reading in the NLT version, if you're wondering. So I'm not sure what version you have. You might have something slightly different. I'm reading in NLT. I think it's just NLT is the wording is probably the easiest to follow in modern English, I think. So it's helpful, I think. It's worded in a way that is more contemporary, which is not necessarily bad. I know sometimes we have this idea that like the wording that's more exact to the exact wording in the original translation is the best, but translation is tricky, and translation is best when you understand what it means. So all translations are a translation, and they're most effective when they help you understand what the original meaning was, not necessarily when each word is a direct, exact replication of the original word. It's best when the idea that was in the passage is best expressed and understood in what you're reading. Sorry, that's just a tangent, but I hope that made sense. So anyways, I'm reading the NLT. So it says, my child, listen to what I say, treasure my commands, tune your ears to wisdom, concentrate on understanding, cry out for insight, ask for understanding, search for them as you would for silver, seek them like hidden treasures. Then you will understand what it means to fear the Lord, and you will gain knowledge of God, for the Lord grants wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He grants a treasure of common sense to the honest. If you keep reading, he goes into a lot of different things, but this idea, it's painting this picture of wisdom as this thing to be sought after, that it's precious, more precious than wealth, more precious than things of great value. And I think the idea that's being presented here is that, there's, first of all, that wisdom can be sought out, it can be found. But also, he says to search for it like a hidden treasure. But also, it's kind of presenting that wisdom is something it's a greater treasure than any physical treasure that you can find. So in all the things in the world that are valuable, and wisdom literature is all about doing well in life and following the principles of life that lead to well-being and success. So when it talks about wisdom, it's saying, you can seek after, success and riches and fame and all of those things, but wisdom is so much more valuable than that, because wisdom is really the key to a well-lived life. Without wisdom, all of those other things fall apart. And so the framework, the key to wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and getting wisdom is the key to all of the other things that you pursue in life. That pursuing wisdom is even better, even greater than anything that you can seek out in life. If that makes sense. So I think it's really presenting this picture that wisdom is this invaluable treasure. It's this thing that God has woven into the universe, and that it's the most valuable thing we can seek out. And actually, if you backtrack just a little bit, at the end of chapter 1, if you follow with me, there's a section starting in verse 20, and it paints this picture. So we have this, father who's kind of giving advice to his child and saying, listen to our instruction, listen to the wisdom that we give to you. Here's some advice, you need to follow it. And then we get to verse 20, and the voice turns to the voice of wisdom. It's this personification of wisdom. And it says, wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries out in the public square. She calls to the crowds along the main street. So the imagery is wisdom is this woman who's crying out. And she's, on the street corner. She says, come and listen to my counsel. I'll share my heart with you and make you wise. Verse 24 says, I called you so often, but you wouldn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice and rejection the correction I offer. So I will laugh when you are in trouble. I will mock when disaster overtakes you, when calamity overtakes you like a storm, and anguish and distress overwhelm you. And it continues with that. But, this imagery is powerful because it shows us that, it's really telling us that wisdom is something that can be pursued. It's something that we can seek after. And in many ways, God's even saying, it's like this woman calling on the street. Like, it can be found on the corner of the street. It can be found in all these places that in some ways God's truths, God's goodness, God's wisdom has been woven into the world, and it can be found in places. And in some places, it maybe even calling out. It's obvious. It's right in front of us. And we should pursue it with everything that we have. We should pursue it more than we pursue success. We should pursue it more than we pursue, money and success in our job. We should pursue it more than items, more than anything that has physical value in this world. We should pursue wisdom over that, because wisdom is the key to a life well lived. Is the key to really practical righteousness in our everyday life. So every day, we're trying to live like Jesus. And if we want that in our day-to-day and the nitty-grittiness of everyday life, we need to pursue wisdom. And so I think the conversation for us, I hope this is all helpful in kind of understanding not only the literature of like Proverbs and how to read the book, but I hope it helps to frame, our own practical lives and how we're going to practice this. Mark had a great statement on Sunday that I really liked. He said, "We make our decisions, and our decisions make us." And this is right in line with the way wisdom is talked about throughout the book of Proverbs, that it's saying wisdom is the thing we should pursue, and without it, things will fall apart. And if we pursue foolishness, which can be passive, wisdom's calling out on the street corner, but foolishness is also calling out on the street corner. And if we live foolishly, if we neglect wisdom, if we pursue these other things instead, the formula like A plus B equals C, we're going to end up with calamity. We're going to end up with none of the things that God intends for us. If we want to receive the kind of life God wants, we have to pursue wisdom. And if we don't, we're going to receive all kinds of calamity and death and heartache and destruction in our life. And so I think the conversation from here, for us is, first of all, are we pursuing wisdom? I know that sounds so simple, but in all reality, like, how easy is it in life to pursue all kinds of things, good things, not even bad things. We want to do well in our jobs, and we want to take care of our family, or spend time with our friends and have fun. And we want to, accomplish things in life. We want to achieve some goals. We want to, there's all kinds of good things, but this is even what is being said in Proverbs. There are all sorts of good things, but wisdom is what will benefit you so much more than any of those things. And so my question to you is, and for each other is, are we pursuing wisdom? And does that begin with the fear of the Lord for us? Are we pursuing a wisdom that stems from the fear of the Lord? And if not, how do we pursue that? How do we pursue wisdom that comes from God? And I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I hope that this is a conversation that you guys will have with your families, that you have with friends, the community that you have available. But I also hope you'll engage with me this week as we think about this throughout the week. And I'll try to post some thoughts on our Facebook page and the Instagram page. And I'd love for you guys to interact. But, I hope you'll think about this week. How do we pursue wisdom? Or are we pursuing wisdom? And if not, or even if we are, how can we fervently pursue wisdom in our lives? I'll tell you just right off the top of my head a couple quick thoughts that I have, but I want you to marinate in this and think about it. One, for me, I think one of the best ways to pursue wisdom is, first of all, the scriptures. You guys know this. sometimes I found in times in life when have so much, I feel like my mind is muddy and I don't feel like I have a lot of clarity about just big practical wisdom. I would encourage you just to read through Proverbs. Just you don't even think like, oh, I'm gonna get tons of stuff out of this and I'm gonna apply every proverb that I read. Just start reading through the Proverbs, and there's a lot of just practical wisdom. It's almost like absorbing it. You just keep reading through it. That's a great way. I mean, reading the scriptures is obviously a great way to get wisdom, but also I think a really practical way to gather wisdom is from wise people. Just spend time with people that you consider to be very wise. I feel like this was a way that I learned so much while I was in school. Was not just time I spent in class, but there were certain professors that just I found to be very wise people. It seemed like they weren't just academically smart, but they really had maturity and wisdom in their life. And I would just try to spend time with them, try to ask them questions. I'd stay after class and just ask them about things I was thinking about, or I would just try to see if there was a way I could spend time with them or be around them. And I think that's one of the great ways. And I mean, that applies even forth. I think it's always great to have someone in your life that that you are intentionally trying to learn from, that you consider to be very wise. And another way is to seek out knowledge, read books, just always be a learner. Be someone who's always seeking out ways to learn new things. I think, when we stop actively trying to learn, I'm not saying you got to, read 100 books this year or something. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I think when we stop trying to learn new things, our minds literally begin to like kind of close in and harden into just whatever we already know. And one of the best things we can do to combat that is to always be desiring to learn new things. So those are just a couple off the cuff thoughts that I have literally right now in the moment. But I'd like for us to marinate in this week. What are practical ways that we can pursue growing in wisdom? What does it look like for us from this basis of a fear of the Lord, to pursue wisdom more than anything else? Because if we do that, if Proverbs says, if we're living according to the principles of Proverbs, it's saying that wisdom will be a much greater payoff than anything else that we could pursue in our day-to-day life. So I just want to leave that with you guys. Hopefully we'll be able to continue. I'd love to hear from you guys. So hopefully I'll be able to hear from you guys about thoughts that you're having, ways that you maybe feel like God is laying on your heart that you can be growing in wisdom. And I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on that. So hopefully we can continue to interact with that this week. But be thinking about that. I'll post about it some more. And anybody have, maybe I'll just give it a couple minutes. Anybody have an immediate reaction, just something that a question or a thought they have right now before we hop off here? No questions, no immediate thoughts? My understanding is that the lag is only 4 seconds. So I'll let you think for a second still. I'll be patient and let you think for a second. I get a little bit antsy, so I forget that it takes a few minutes to think and formulate questions. I know that that's true because I'm the same way. Bible has a lot of hard to apply to real world situations. Yeah, I agree. And two immediate thoughts on that. So if you're not looking at the chat right now, he says Zach's question is the Bible has a lot of wisdom. I feel like sometimes it can be hard to apply it to real world situations. Sometimes, honestly, what you're saying is the whole purpose of wisdom literature. That wisdom literature. So when we're reading through Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and a lot of this type of writing is we're rolling up our sleeves. We're not just talking about hope and love. We're talking about how do I do it tomorrow. So maybe a great place for you is just to start reading through Proverbs and getting some real practical nitty gritty wisdom. So that's one thought. Another thought is, sometimes wisdom and the way we grow and learn isn't always through immediate answers and direct application. Sometimes when you're reading through the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians and you're like, this is really like, I'm learning a lot about, the character of God, or, something that feels a little bit more abstract and it's really enriching my soul, but I don't really know what I do about it. And sometimes that's actually perfectly okay, because the way that it's formation, not just information. So part of the way we grow, I think, is through formation, where like the immediate application isn't always obvious, but the growth is, as we read and learn, okay, isn't that amazing how like Christ's love resembles this, or, wow, I really pulled out from this, the way that, the significance of my union with Christ is like Christ's union with the Father, and you might think like that's a really rich thing to know, but you don't really know how it applies. But that's kind of okay, because what it is doing is it's changing the way you think about the world. It's changing the way you think about yourself. It's changing the way you think about others. You read some of Jesus' teachings and it's changing the way you understand the character of God. And you may not immediately know the application, but it's changing your dispositions and your heart, which is eventually application. Does that make sense? So there are times where it's not immediately obvious what we should do with something we're learning, but it doesn't mean we're not being changed to become more like God. I know that might be a little bit different than wisdom, but I think it's helpful to know that, and know that you're still growing it, even if sometimes you're not sure of the exact application. The other thing I would say too is just like, sometimes it does take some kind of walking through a series of questions, as you reflect on maybe what you just read in the Bible. So maybe you read a passage and you just need to ask a few questions, like, okay, what did I take from that? So I just read, 2 Corinthians 4 that talks about not giving up, talks about, being persistent and knowing that even though we're fragile and broken humans in a broken world, that we're receiving an eternal inheritance. And that's like really encouraging. And you think, what do I take from that? Well, and you think, well, I guess I'm taking that I have this hope and that gives me something to hold on to. And maybe that doesn't feel like wisdom at first, but maybe in your everyday life, you think, how does that apply in my life? Well, it applies that there are days that I wake up and I don't feel hopeful. And I feel like I'm subject to my emotions, or I'm subject to just my daily experience that's kind of got me down or feeling discouraged. And maybe the wisdom is, I remember that even though these things hurt, they're painful, or even though I'm discouraged, I'm not subject to that. That actually, these are just a small experience. And even though I'm fragile and broken, that I am receiving, there's this outwardly we're wasting away, but inwardly we're being renewed. And then you think, you know what? God wants to renew me inwardly, even when I'm feeling destroyed outwardly. And so there is a bit of wisdom, but sometimes you have to walk through a few questions. Ask yourself, what do I take? What did I take from that? And then how does that help me in a practical scenario? How does that change the way I act when I'm feeling discouraged? Or how does that change the way I act when this situation is happening? Is that helpful at all? That's just a few thoughts. Obviously, I'm sure you have some thoughts as well. Is that helpful at all, Zach, in thinking through some of that? I'll give you a second to type, unless you don't want to type, which would be fine. Awesome. Anybody else have some thoughts or a question that is on your mind right now that you want to ask while we're on here together? I'll give you guys a minute just to. Oh, hey, is it actually working now? Almost. My message on my computer that was telling me that the stream wasn't working just went away after all this time. So convenient. Awesome. If you guys don't have any more questions, again, just remember, I'll post some more stuff this week, and unpack this with people that are around you in your community, whether that's family or friends, and ask yourself, how am I pursuing wisdom? What does that look like in my life? Let's just pray together real quick, and then hopefully I'll see you guys again next Tuesday. Lord Jesus, I thank you that in your word you've spoken to us about how to live in your world, and you've given us so much help and wisdom and how to pursue wisdom and the importance of it, that you're instructing us and teaching us. And God, we profess today that we want to be wise people. We want to pursue your wisdom, and we believe that that your wisdom is better than gold, it's better than silver, and we want to pursue it. So God, I ask that you'd help us to examine that this week, and as we examine, I ask that you'd speak to us, that you would show us real life scenarios and moments and ways that we can be people who pursue wisdom more than anything else, and that we learn to walk in your ways, to walk in the way that you've made us to live in agreement with the universe that you've made. So God, help us this week to hear your voice and to be obedient to it, and to begin to experience the fruit of living in wisdom. I pray all of these things in the powerful and precious name of Jesus. Amen. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next Tuesday, and have a great night.